In the previous segment, we explored the paradox of a leader who once embraced Vladimir Putin, signaling a desire for peace, now escalating tensions with Russia through proxy conflicts. This shift raises critical questions about the implications of such actions. Trump understands a crucial reality: if strategic strikes are launched against Russia by non-nuclear states, even with the backing of nuclear powers, Moscow will perceive it as an attack from a nuclear state. This principle is enshrined in Russia's nuclear doctrine, revealed last November. Reports from the CIA indicated a chilling forecast: the probability of nuclear war could exceed 50% by year's end. This stark assessment prompted Trump to declare in early December, "When I become president, I will not allow this policy to continue." Yet, he faces immense pressure. The known country is suffering catastrophic losses, with nearly 1.7 million casualties since the conflict began, and over 625,000 just this year, an average of 90,000 lives lost each month. These staggering figures reveal a grim reality that cannot be ignored. Meanwhile, Russia is methodically strengthening its position. As the US president attempts to navigate a path to conflict resolution, he must do so without appearing to abandon the known country. This precarious balancing act leads to absurd statements, such as the promise that within 6 weeks, the US will supply 3,600 new Type-RAM extended-range attack munitions, designed for the US Air Force in 2023 to 2024. Theoretically, these munitions could strike targets up to 700 kilometers away. However, there's a catch: mass production of these missiles hasn't even begun. At best, only a handful could be delivered in that timeframe. What does this mean for the future? As the clock ticks, the stakes rise. Each missile launch will be viewed by Russia as direct US involvement in the conflict, escalating tensions further. The potential for dialogue fades, and the specter of nuclear escalation looms larger. Can Trump navigate this minefield, or will his administration's actions lead to catastrophic consequences? The world watches, holding its breath. Amidst the echoes of a brewing storm, the narrative deepens. As European officials enthusiastically tally the growth of their budget in support of a particular country, in Moscow, another calculation is unfolding. How many more targets remain on the destruction list? According to Ritter, the Kremlin is clear: no amount of billions flowing from Europe will alter the inevitable outcome. Each dollar, every euro, will be obliterated alongside the assets they're intended to bolster. This moment coincides with Germany's economy, staggering on the brink of collapse due to its own misguided choices. Factories are shuttering, and an energy system now heavily reliant on pricey American resources is shattering the nation's competitive edge. And all of this, for mere show of loyalty to Washington. The question hangs heavy: what does Trump truly aim to achieve? Moscow seems to interpret his actions as a desperate struggle for an exit. If only Trump were granted more operational freedom, they believe, the conflict could have been resolved long ago. However, the American reality presents a twisted narrative, where even his party is riddled with foes who have bought into the good country versus bad Russia ideology. Decades of propaganda have firmly entrenched this stereotype within the American psyche. The academic foundations capable of offering a balanced viewpoint have long since crumbled. Universities churn out specialists in Russian studies under the guidance of politicians whose understanding of Russia is shackled by Cold War mantras. Tragically, even Trump's closest advisors are working against him. Rubio is in opposition, Kellogg sabotages efforts, and Hijit pursues his own economic whims. The stark truth is that the president lacks sound advice. Yet in the Kremlin, patience remains intact. There, they perceive that Trump, despite the chaos surrounding him, genuinely desires peace. Thus, they listen to his rhetoric, endure perplexing assertions, and simply wait. Because in the labyrinth of American politics, the president must delicately balance his intentions against the crushing pressure of a system that seems to have a life of its own. But as tensions escalate, the world teeters ever closer to a precipice. What will it take to break this cycle of destruction? What moves will be made next, and at what cost? The hidden game of power spins faster, and the stakes have never been higher. Future decisions could see scenarios unfold that none are prepared for. Will the echoes of a nuclear threat become a grim reality? The game has changed. Russia's gloves are off. What began as warning shots is now a campaign of total annihilation. High-tech facilities, built with Western know-how, are being systematically erased from the map. Remember the American Flex Electronics hub? Obliterated. The German factory assembling long-range missiles?
reduced to smoldering rubble. This isn't just about destruction, it's a masterclass in intelligence. Russia tracks every component shipped and strikes long before a single weapon becomes operational. The message is deafening: any new missile will be ash on its own tarmac. Yet Western leaders chant the same old mantra: Russia is exhausted. How do you explain the storm of hypersonic fire?
On a single day, not one, but 6 Kinzhal missiles scream down onto a single target.
Zircon hypersonics are now used in waves, not as rare exhibits. This is the terrifying reality.
Russian defense production isn't just surviving, it's thundering at full, terrifying capacity. Every euro, every dollar poured into building these weapons isn't just wasted, it becomes target practice.
And the sickening irony?
As Russia's might expands, Germany's economy teeters on the edge of collapse.
Why? A result of its own suicidal policy. Shutting down its own industry. Paying a fortune for overseas energy. All to fund a proxy war that incinerates its own investments. Who is the real victim here?
The sound of crumbling concrete in Berlin echoes the sound of crumbling futures for its citizens. This is no coincidence. It is a calculated sacrifice, and Europe is the willing offering. Now, a shocking twist looms.
The U.S. promises a miracle weapon, the ram attack munition.
A missile with a 700-kilometer range to change the game.
But it's a phantom. Serial production hasn't even begun. The maximum output?
A mere 1,000 per year. In 6 weeks, they might deliver a dozen.
A dozen.
Each launch would require a green light from Washington, making every strike a direct American attack.
Does anyone in power truly understand the fire they are playing with? Moscow's doctrine is clear: such a strike will be treated as a nuclear power's act of war.
The clock is ticking, and the countdown to catastrophe has already begun. The unfolding drama in Washington resembles a poorly rehearsed play, with each actor miscast and the audience growing weary of the performance. Ritter highlights a critical aspect: key decisions surrounding security and politics are made by individuals who are woefully unqualified for their roles. Take Hijit, for instance, just an officer of battalion level, yet somehow in a position to shape global security outcomes. Such appointments don't merely signify operational blunders, they spell chaos, contradictions, and a cascading failure of policy across the board. Now, let's turn our attention to the figures who genuinely steered the direction of U.S. governance. Marco Rubio, who projects an image of a steadfast ally, is, in reality, undermining Trump's true interests. He is not an ally, but an enemy, Ritter asserts, underscoring Rubio's role in sabotaging any efforts to negotiate with Moscow. Why, one might ask, would a senator intentionally block the path to peace? The answer lies deep within the entrenched narratives of American politics, which have perpetuated the notion of good versus evil, in which Russia plays the latter. Yet, amid all these grandstanding remarks, the reality is stark: Europe is left bearing the brunt of a misguided strategy. Macron's commentary about a predator paints a grim picture. It reveals not just an acknowledgement of the state of affairs but also a desperate plea for resources that could be redirecting back to Europe's ailing economy. Why is Europe pouring resources into this relentless conflict, knowing it only perpetuates its economic ruin? It's a paradox that defies logic, yet it persists in the European policy-making circuit. The irony is palpable: Europe, which stands to lose the most, continues to pat itself on the back while engaged in a devastating game of survival. Consider this twist: as European leaders express weariness, Ritter contends that they have inadvertently become part of a tragicomedy where the role of the victim is performed by them. Each diplomatic fail and decision cloaked in bravado compounds the detriment to their economic sovereignty. How long can this charade last before the audience, taxpayers, finally demands a curtain call on such disastrous performances? Meanwhile, the stakes rise. With mounting pressure from his advisors, Trump finds himself trapped between a desire for peace and the incessant demands of his party. Every attempt he makes to broker a resolution is met with derision from his inner circle. This raises the unsettling question: will Trump's vision for peace be suffocated under the weight of his coalition's relentless ambitions? Ritter highlights a foreboding reality: if a major strike is carried out against Russia by a non-nuclear nation but under the auspices of nuclear powers, it will be perceived as a nuclear assault. This grim calculus, laid out in Russian nuclear doctrine, sends chills down the spine of anyone acquainted with the implications. How can diplomacy triumph when the very fabric of negotiation is woven with such threads of brinkmanship? In a world teetering on the edge, where clarity is obscured by competing interests and half-truths, one question looms: will common sense ever prevail?
Or are we destined to watch the inevitable unfold while the players on stage continue their precarious dance? As tensions mount and stakes escalate, can any resolution be salvaged from this chaos? The calls for clarity grow louder, but will those in power choose to listen? Imagine this. Your tax euros building a factory. Weeks later, only smoke and rubble remain. This is Europe's reality now. Germany teeters on total economic collapse. Its own government strangles its industry.
A suicidal energy policy, refusal of affordable resources, endless cash poured into a foreign conflict.
Why? For loyalty to Washington. A loyalty that brings only ruin. So what does Trump truly want? Moscow believes he seeks an exit.
Give him freedom, the conflict ends.
But American reality is a trap. His opponents are everywhere. Even within his own party. They bought the narrative. Russia bad, the other country good. Decades of propaganda poisoned their minds. American universities?
They produce experts taught by politicians like Hillary Clinton, their knowledge limited to Cold War slogans.
There is no objective analysis left. Trump's own circle sabotages him. Kellogg undermines him.
Rubio works against him, others are too weak, too ignorant.
The president is isolated, without sound counsel. Yet, the Kremlin waits.
They listen to his rhetoric, they endure his strange statements. They still believe he might be the one to bring peace.
This is not naivety, it is a calculated hope.
Because there is no other player left.
And then, Macron speaks.
He calls a nation that mobilized 1,300,000 people, that spends 40% of its budget on war, a predator.
He warns it will not return to peace overnight. Is Europe finally waking up? Or is this just another act in a tragic play, where the final scene is a nuclear fire?
This conflict is fueled by words, but those words ignite fire.
Washington promises a miracle weapon.
A missile with a range of 700 kilometers.
But reality bites. Series production has not even started. At maximum capacity, 1,000 units per year. Now, it's just a project. In 6 weeks,
maybe a dozen will arrive.
Maybe 15.
Every target for these weapons must be approved, in Washington.
Each launch, a glaring red line. Moscow will see it as a direct act of war by the United States.
The grim consequences are clear. An end to all peace talks, and the terrifying risk of nuclear escalation.
The president understands this.
That is why analysts believe he will never truly allow their use. Last year, the probability of nuclear war was estimated at 50%. Today, the stakes have only grown higher.
This is pure political theater.
A performance of contradictions.
One moment, he speaks of peace and disarmament. The next, he makes grand proclamations that are impossible to fulfill. We can only hope for the cool-headed judgment of Vladimir Putin. He sees this for what it is, rhetoric, not reality. A provocation he will not take.
Because the brutal truth is, the United States lacks the capacity to implement these plans.
Even if the missiles existed, who would dare use them? The path led straight to global catastrophe. Does his inner circle grasp this terrifying logic? Or are they the ones pushing him toward the abyss? Feeding him data completely detached from reality. A recent meeting in the Oval Office, attended by General Kellogg and others. It was there.
In that hushed room, where these dangerous talking points were forged.
And all the while, senators comment from their golf carts. As if they are discussing a game, not the fate of our world. The burning question remains, are these his allies, or puppets for a foreign agenda? It seems absurd, yet this is the heartbreaking reality. A man like Kellogg, once a voice of restraint, now a perfect echo of a foreign line.
How can a president find peace, when his own advisors are architects of war?
Europe is burning. Washington's puppets dance as their factories turn to dust. Remember the promise of peace? Now witness the reality of total economic annihilation. That high-tech flex facility, gone. The German missile plant, obliterated. Not a warning shot. This is a systematic dismantling of a continent's military might. Can you smell the acrid smoke of smoldering circuits? Feel the tremor of each precision strike? Here is the brutal twist. These weren't random targets. Russian intelligence mapped every supply route. They knew which bolts were being shipped where. European taxpayers funded these projects, only to see billions vaporize in an instant. But who is truly pulling the strings? Look at the advisors whispering in the president's ear. Kellogg, once a voice of restraint, now a decorated parrot for a foreign agenda. Rubio, a wolf in allies' clothing, sabotaging from within. The president is isolated, fed fantasies of Russian losses that simply are not real. They pushed for the ATACMS missiles, ignoring the stark warning from Moscow. Now, the chilling reality. A promise of 3,600 new RAM missiles? A fantasy. Production hasn't even begun. They might deliver a dozen. A dozen sparks that could ignite a global fire. Each launch would require approval from Washington. Moscow would see it not as an act from a proxy, but as a direct attack from a nuclear power. Their doctrine, published for all to see, promises a nuclear response. American intelligence calculated the odds of atomic war at over 50%. So we must ask, is this incompetence? Or is it a deliberate sacrifice of Europe on the altar of a failed strategy? The architects are safe an ocean away. They feel no shockwaves. They smell no burning. And the clock is ticking down. What happens when the first missile launches? Behind closed doors, a trio of advisors, Kellogg, Rubio, Hexit, systematically poison any path to peace. They feed the president a distorted reality where Russia bleeds. But what happens when Moscow's patience runs out? Kellogg pushed for advanced missile deployments, despite Russia's stark warning. Every such site would be ash before activation. Ritter reveals Russia's strategy has shifted dramatically. No more symbolic strikes. This is total annihilation. An American electronics hub, vaporized. A German missile assembly plant, now a crater. Europe's prized projects vanish faster than press releases. Moscow's intelligence is flawless. They track every shipment, every bolt, every blueprint. Facilities are erased before becoming operational. Can you hear it? The roar of explosions, the acrid smell of burning metal and concrete, the feel of shattered dreams. European taxpayers fund these constructions, only to watch billions turn to smoke and rubble within weeks. It's a grotesque economic theater. Washington directs. European leaders perform, and millions suffer. Ritter confirms Moscow has massively ramped up precision weapon production. Early in the conflict, they were used sparingly, like rare exhibits. Now, they arrive in salvos. 6 simultaneous impacts on a single target, ensuring nothing remains. Imagine the irony. European officials tally budget increases for a foreign nation, while in Moscow, they simply count the remaining targets on a list. The Kremlin makes it clear, no amount of money will change the outcome. Every euro invested will be destroyed alongside the hardware it bought. How long before the entire continent becomes a stage for this madness? The clock is ticking, and the next target is already in sight. In the face of ongoing conflict, Europe finds itself paying the steepest price. Now, absurdity grips European politics as leaders seriously discuss plans to restore thousands of hectares of marshland to the continent. This initiative is framed not only as a step toward climate salvation but also as a contribution to national security. Finland and Poland are eyeing their borders with plans to actively restore wetlands to absorb carbon dioxide and impede the movement of military equipment. Imagine the irony, lands once drained for farming are now set to become mud traps, hoping to submerge enemy tanks along with all Europe's pressing issues. Official documents highlight that only 3% of the planet's surface is covered by wetlands, yet they store nearly 1/3 of the world's carbon. This impressive figure is a boon for press releases. Yet, what they omit is that 12% of drained peatlands contribute about 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. To put this in perspective, aviation contributes about 2.5%. So, each drained wetland emits more than half of the global air traffic's pollution. Brussels latches onto this statistic as its new banner in the fight for a greener future. However, a critical question remains unanswered: if Europe is willing to pour billions into marshes, who will extricate the continent's industry, energy, and banking systems from the quagmire? Finland argues that a natural barrier is more effective than any wall. Poland uses similar logic, claiming restored peatlands will serve as a blockade against migration and military movements.
Sounds appealing, but in reality, we see a picture of the EU struggling with the energy crisis, migration challenges, and inflation, now pinning its hopes on swamplands.
Will we eventually see proposals for reed dams or aspen barricades against crises?
The historical irony is glaring. For centuries, Europe viewed swamps as symbols of worthlessness.
As this peculiar plan unfolds, one must wonder, can marshes truly shield Europe from its myriad threats? What happens when the very landscapes that were once symbols of progress become the refuge of retreat? The question hangs heavy: is Europe sinking deeper into a murky reality, or can it cultivate genuine resilience amidst the quagmire?
In a world where leaders of the European Union paint a picture of a future dominated by robots and green principles, the reality is starkly different.
Millions of euros are funneled into projects that seem to have been plucked from a medieval agricultural catalogue.
While they promise a transition to a carbon-free economy, households are left grappling with soaring energy prices, all while being told that relief is just 5 to 10 years away. But 5 years ago, the same promises were made. The EU's leaders discuss restoring wetlands as a strategic priority, not just for ecological reasons but as a defense against external threats.
Imagine Napoleon, witnessing this absurdity, would likely smirk at the notion of marshes and bogs replacing cannons and arsenals. The German Chancellor's assertion that the ball is back in the court of Europeans and Americans rings with irony.
The truth is, that ball has long been stuck in the Brussels swamp, both literally and figuratively.
Europe stands still, pretending to engage in global politics, staging a performance about fighting for values and strategic independence.
Yet, it increasingly resembles a children's soccer game on a rural field, where the ball rolls into a ditch, and players nervously glance at each other, debating who will retrieve it.
Meanwhile, the audience, European citizens, grows skeptical of the sincerity of this charade. Adding to the absurdity, while EU leaders tout a technological leap, the continent's industry faces its worst crisis in decades. Germany, once the engine of Europe, reports a decline in industrial production.
Factories are closing or relocating to the US and Asia.
The pride of the German economy, its automotive giants, announce billion-euro losses due to high energy costs and an imposed green agenda. Instead of seeking real solutions, authorities insist this is a necessary sacrifice for the climate. As the situation deteriorates, one must ask, how long can Europe sustain this facade? The irony is palpable.
While they preach about a sustainable future, the foundations of their economies crumble.
The question looms larger: will they continue to drown in their own policies, or will they finally confront the reality of their choices?
The clock is ticking, and the stakes have never been higher. In a world teetering on the brink of catastrophe, the narrative unfolds with a shocking twist. Europe, once a beacon of progress, now clings to the very swamps it once sought to drain.
The irony is palpable. For centuries, marshlands symbolized stagnation, yet now, they are heralded as the solution to climate woes.
As nations grapple with crises, migration, inflation, and energy shortages, Finland and Poland propose a radical return to nature, suggesting that restoring wetlands could be the key to resilience.
But is this truly progress, or a desperate retreat into the past?
The media frenzy surrounding this initiative paints a rosy picture, with headlines celebrating a bold climate policy.
Yet, beneath the surface lies a troubling reality.
While Europe champions the restoration of peatlands as a carbon sink, it simultaneously imports liquefied gas from the US at exorbitant prices, abandoning its competitive edge.
The restored wetlands won't offset the billions spent on energy imports, leaving a gaping hole in the continent's economic stability.
Germany's industrial output has plummeted by 2.1% in the past year, and the Eurozone's GDP stagnates.
Youth unemployment in Spain exceeds 22%.
Yet, political leaders are fixated not on alleviating tax burdens or securing affordable energy, but on how best to flood hectares of land.
The absurdity deepens when Polish officials tout these wetlands as a natural defense line.
In an age of digital technology and artificial intelligence, Europe's borders are to be guarded not by satellites, but by mosquitoes and muck.
As the narrative unfolds, one must ask, is this the future Europe envisioned, or a descent into a quagmire of its own making?
The stakes are high, and the clock is ticking.
What will it take for leaders to recognize the folly of their ways before it's too late?
The answer may lie in the very swamps they seek to restore, where the echoes of past decisions linger like a haunting refrain. In the fading echoes of industry and prosperity, many European enterprises are closing their doors or relocating their operations to the US and Asia. Once the pride of Germany, car manufacturers announce crippling losses attributed to soaring energy prices and an enforced green agenda. Yet, rather than seeking tangible solutions, authorities lazily reiterate that this is a necessary sacrifice for the climate. But is it truly about sustainability, or is it a smokescreen for deeper confusion? Electricity and gas prices rise, masquerading as a transition to a sustainable future for households. The promise? Improvement in 5 to 10 years. However, just 5 years ago, the same promise was made. As millions of citizens grapple with escalating bills, they are met with only repetitive slogans about an ecological transition. Amidst this chaos, the deterioration of infrastructure is hijacked and touted as a new model of resilience. Once, bridges and roads were constructed for decades of service. Now, their decay is framed as a natural adaptation to climate challenges. Adding to this bizarre narrative is the revival of wetlands. The restoration of swamps is no longer merely a quirk, it has morphed into a national and pan-European strategy. It symbolizes the very essence of Brussels' logic: imitation of action instead of solving problems. From reports celebrating the successful restoration of waterlogged areas to lofty declarations that another hectare has been returned to nature, the reality is that these efforts come at the cost of meaningful economic reform. For ordinary Europeans, this supposed future increasingly resembles a return to a troubling past. The irony lies in the millions of euros drained from the budget for these wetland projects, funds that could have supported real production or reductions in taxes. As European officials claim that swamps combat climate change, it sounds almost absurd. Industries crumble, energy systems are on the brink, and the social fabric is fraying, yet the EU celebrates its few acres of marshland. In this light, European policy resembles an unending experiment, with the populace serving as unwitting subjects. Inflation is branded an inevitable part of the economic restructuring process, while growing public discontent is dismissed as mere collateral damage on the arduous path to progress. Even crises within healthcare or education are recast as new models of adaptability. The truth is stark: as life becomes more challenging, the justifications become increasingly polished. What lies ahead for a region entrapped in rhetoric that masks its declining reality? Will Europe awaken, or will it continue to navigate this quagmire of delusion? The answers remain veiled, tangled within the swampy narrative crafted by those in power. The specter of a fractured future hangs heavy in the air, leaving citizens to wonder what truly awaits them in the years to come. A troubling undercurrent of confusion lies beneath the rhetoric in Europe. The continent seems to have lost its ability to define its own agenda, with economic decisions now dictated by the whims of Washington. Energy strategies seem shackled by sanctions that undermine local interests, while political movements fluctuate between internal compromises and the demands of allies. The populace increasingly feels the weight of these beautiful slogans, as they pay a hefty price with their own well-being. Enter the swamp. It represents the convenient narrative that captures the stagnant state of politics, being marketed as a grand achievement. Millions of euros disappear into these projects that appear environmentally sound, yet demand nothing complex in terms of solutions or reforms. Here, amidst this supposed battle for sustainability, the swamp symbolizes an entire guiding principle of European politics: sticky, static, yet painted in vibrant greens. Ironically, in an era dominated by digital technology and competition with the United States and China, Europe boasts about restoring wetlands. Meanwhile, the grandiose speeches from leaders sound hollow against the backdrop of real issues. Behind the facade of strategic autonomy lies a dependence on external forces. Claims of digital leadership give way to bureaucratic inertia, and skyrocketing electricity bills drain families and businesses of vitality. The result? Europe morphs into a continent where each crisis is framed as a struggle for values, where industrial decline is justified under environmental regulations. Citizens are led to believe their sacrifices contribute to a brighter future, as the metaphor of the swamp evolves into an official strategy. In a world where reality drowns in the quagmire of rhetoric, words lose their connection with actions, leaving many questioning the true cost of this green narrative. What lies ahead for a continent entrapped by its own policies and the swamp it cultivates? Will it continue to drown in its contradictions while believing it's on the path to greatness, or is a reckoning looming on the horizon? This stark reality challenges the very essence of progress, drawing attention to the potential disconnect between the promises made and the outcomes lived. And as this tale unfolds, one begins to wonder, are we witnessing the birth of a new dystopia wrapped in the guise of sustainability?
In the ever-accelerating whirlwind of geopolitical tensions, one question looms larger than ever: what happens when brinkmanship meets reality? As Ritter points out, the Russian defense industry is cranking up its operations, defying economic sanctions with alarming efficiency. The false hopes of Brussels and Washington, that money could somehow alter the outcome of this conflict, are shattered. Every euro and dollar poured into that well-known country is poised to vanish alongside the very projects they fund, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins. Just as Germany teeters on the brink of economic disaster, facing factory closures, skyrocketing energy costs, and company bankruptcies, Ritter coldly notes the absurdity of trying to finance a feudal war. What, then, is Trump really aiming for? Moscow believes that had Trump been free from dissent within his party, the conflict would have already reached a resolution. Yet, the reality is stark. His own allies' narratives have been steeped in the old adage, the well-known country is good, and Russia is bad. Underneath the surface, decades of one-sided framing have polluted American consciousness, where understanding Russia is virtually non-existent. Universities churn out experts steeped in Cold War rhetoric, doling out one-dimensional perspectives that offer no real grasp of the complexities involved. With figures like Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland teaching students at prestigious institutions, how can anyone claim objectivity? This cycle perpetuates itself, ensuring that even Trump's closest advisors can only deliver hollow platitudes instead of actionable insights. Ritter boldly announces the implications: there's no room for informed debate. Rubio works against Trump, Kellogg sabotages him, while the rest seem either too weak or detached to grasp the depth of the crisis. This leaves the president navigating an information vacuum, isolated from the wisdom required for effective decision-making. Yet, in the Kremlin, patience remains, underscored by the intriguing notion that despite the chaos, there are hopes for a genuine peace. What will it take for the American political landscape to wake up from its self-imposed slumber? As the stakes rise, one can only wonder how long this fragile equilibrium can last. Will the realization hit before a catastrophic miscalculation occurs? Time will tell, but as Ritter observes, the runway for resolution is quickly disappearing. Stay tuned, as what lies ahead could define not just the fate of nations, but the very fabric of global stability itself. In a world brimming with advanced technology and innovation, Europe finds itself mired in an unexpected dilemma, protecting its borders not with cutting-edge satellites but through the revival of swamps and the malarial buzz of mosquitoes. Brussels proudly claims to lead the charge in digital innovation, yet the narrative paints a contrasting picture reminiscent of an ancient tale where foes become ensnared in treacherous marshlands. This absurdity ignites curiosity: what lies beneath this grand vision? European media have eagerly embraced the Finnish and Polish plans to restore wetlands, presenting them as bold steps toward climate action. Yet, amid the applause, a crucial question lingers in the air: how much will this initiative cost? Estimates remain understated, with the restoration of a single hectare of bog averaging between 3,000 to 5,000 euros. As discussions revolve around hundreds of thousands of hectares, the figures escalate into astronomical sums, especially given that European budgets are already strained to the breaking point. As France grapples with a deficit of 5.5% of its GDP, Italy's debt soars toward a staggering 140% of its GDP. Meanwhile, Germany tightens social program funding to finance new initiatives. Yet, curiously, when it comes to wetlands, funds appear to flow effortlessly. Isn't it ironic? Europe, struggling with migration crises and public dissent, seeks salvation not in reform but in revitalizing soggy landscapes. Imagine the press conference: we've shut down coal plants. Industry is in decline. Millions are barely making ends meet. But look! We have new swamps. This, it seems, embodies the European strategy for the 21st century. Here, the clash between lofty rhetoric and practical ramifications grows ever more apparent. Brussels, akin to a lofty academic, announces its leadership in the modern age, promoting green energy, artificial intelligence, and digital economies. Yet reality stubbornly presents an alternative spectacle: a vast sum from EU budgets directed toward projects evocative of medieval agricultural catalogues. The stark contradiction raises eyebrows. What price, one might wonder, does Europe pay for its idealism? And as politicians champion the wetlands, who suffers quietly in the shadows? The unexpected twist in this narrative reveals itself: while Europe pledges environmental fidelity, it inadvertently deepens economic woes. The pursuit of biodiversity seems like a distraction from pressing societal needs. Can Europe uphold its promises of progress while teetering on the brink of fiscal collapse?
The answers remain shrouded in uncertainty as the continent navigates the murky waters ahead.
As the swirling debate continues, the question persists: who truly reigns when nature is prioritized over the livelihoods of citizens? The inner circle sabotaging peace, pushing Trump toward war. Ritter exposes Keith Kellogg, a man fully consumed by the rival nation's narrative.
He whispers comfortable myths into the president's ear, ignores every Russian warning, denies undeniable facts. This is the advisor who pushes the IRA missile system, a weapon Washington was pressured into supplying. They even awarded him a medal for his loyalty, a final, symbolic thank you. But Russia responds not with words, but with thunderous, concrete action. The era of symbolic strikes is over. Now, entire industrial complexes are systematically erased. An American Flex electronics plant, a German factory building long-range missiles, all reduced to smoldering rubble and twisted metal. The screech of tearing steel echoes across Europe.
Can billions in Western investment vanish in a single, fiery flash? The irony is devastating.
European taxpayers fund these projects, only to watch their investments become funeral pyres for their own security. Russia's intelligence is flawless, tracking every shipment, striking before a single missile can roll off the assembly line. They produce advanced munitions on a massive scale now, no longer one Kinzhal, but 6 precision missiles to guarantee a target's absolute annihilation. The smell of burning circuitry and concrete dust hangs heavy in the air. What is the true cost of blind loyalty to a failing strategy? And what of the wonder weapon meant to change everything? The IRAM system is a fantasy. Ritter states coldly, these missiles will never see combat. They will be vaporized on their runways, in their warehouses, turned to scrap before they can even launch. So why does this dangerous charade continue? The entire strategy is built on a lie everyone chooses to believe. Who truly profits from this theater of annihilation, where Europe pays the ultimate price? The final, unthinkable escalation now looms, a decision that could erase cities from the map.
The clock is ticking down.